Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Maddi Moore. I'm the Strategic Advocacy Manager at the National Trust of Australia, Victoria. And today I'm going to be speaking with you about climate change and climate action and how heritage is relevant. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which you are viewing this presentation today, and I pay my respects to elders both past and present and acknowledge their continuing connections to land, waters and community. Now, as I go today, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A and I'll be answering questions at the end. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the National Trust in Victoria is the state's premier community-based heritage advocacy organisation. We work towards conserving and protecting our natural, cultural, social and Indigenous heritage for the benefit of current and future generations. We represent over 60,000 members and supporters across Victoria, and we also manage and maintain over 40 sites throughout the state and run activations out of various significant heritage properties. We have house museums, we run our properties as event venues, and we also run education programs. Some of our better known sites include the Old Melbourne Jail and Ripponlea Estate, and we also manage a collection of more than 35,000 objects, many of which are associated with our properties. Now, the climate and biodiversity crisis is the single biggest and fastest growing threat to people, the environment and cultural heritage worldwide. Increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases caused by human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, are accelerating the climate and biodiversity crisis and contributing to the increased frequency and intensity of severe weather events, such as floods, droughts and bushfires. These impacts cause severe damage to our environment and infrastructure, whilst also exacerbating existing pressures such as rapid urbanisation, resource depletion and social inequalities. If new strategies to plan and adapt for these changes are not initiated and actioned immediately, these impacts will have an unprecedented and irreversible effect on our cultural heritage, our connection to place and our way of life. But heritage is not just a helpless victim to climate change. Of course, we need to manage our heritage places to ensure they are resilient to the impacts of climate change, but heritage also plays an active role in mitigation and emissions reduction. In fact, heritage is climate action. Heritage, and in particular, heritage conservation, is actually an inherently sustainable practice. This is a quote from the 2021 State of the Environment report. Our built environment is currently the world's single largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. It consumes around 33% of our water and generates 40% of our waste. As much as 25% of Australia's carbon emissions come from buildings. Now, Carl Elefante coined the phrase, "The greenest building is the one that is already built." And this encapsulates the idea of embodied energy and the investment of materials in existing buildings. For example, if you were to demolish an old building, this would create waste and release emissions from the existing fabric. Additionally, building a new structure in its place would also require energy consumption through obtaining raw materials, manufacturing finished products, transporting materials to the site, and erecting the replacement structure. Comparatively, retrofitting an existing building with energy-efficient components and upgrades reduces energy expenditure of the existing building and also negates the energy costs of a new construction. There is now also a wealth of research to back up the concept that the preservation of built heritage can actively contribute to emissions reduction. A groundbreaking 2011 study by the US National Trust for Historic Preservation, The Greenest Building, Quantifying the Value of Building Reuse, concluded that when comparing buildings of equivalent size and function, building reuse almost always offers environmental savings over demolition and new construction. The study found that it takes between 10 to 80 years for a new building that is 30% more efficient than an average performing existing building to overcome through efficient operations. the negative climate change impacts related to the construction process, and that collectively building reuse and retrofits substantially reduce climate change impacts. This has been further supported by research undertaken by Historic England, which found that when a typical historic building is refurbished and retrofitted, it will emit less carbon by 2050 than a new building. Locally, research by architect Ruth Redden explores the nexus between heritage conservation and sustainability in the Australian context, highlighting broad environmental benefits of conserving historic buildings and providing recommendations for the production of guidelines and resources to support the promotion of sustainable preservation. Most recently too, the Heritage Council of Victoria has released the Why Heritage report. This report contains a chapter on heritage and the environment, and particularly it explores climate change and the built environment. So if there's further research you'd like to look into on this topic, you can find quite a bit in that report as well. But of course, heritage is not just buildings. So cultural landscapes are the combined works of nature and humankind and express a long and intimate relationship between people and our natural environments. Cultural landscapes often reflect specific techniques of sustainable land use, considering the characteristics and limits of the natural environment they are established in, and a particular spiritual relation to nature. Examples of cultural landscapes can include tree plantations, farms, gardens, parks, and beaches. And in Victoria, the Budgebim Cultural Landscape is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The continued existence of traditional forms of land use supports biological diversity in many regions of the world, and the protection of traditional cultural landscapes is helpful in maintaining biological diversity. In Australia, traditional owners have been caring for country for millennia. Unsurprisingly too, individual trees can be culturally significant as community landmarks, meeting places, or through association with historic figures. Significant trees and vegetation contribute environmentally, socially, and economically across Victoria. It is well known that trees can mitigate the urban heat island effect and provide health benefits to the community, as well as create healthier ecosystems with a greater diversity of species. Cultural landscapes and trees provide essential contributions to viable and livable communities, especially in cities that face warmer temperatures and lower rainfall. This is why their protection and responsible management is crucial in fighting the climate and biodiversity crisis. So, what is the National Trust doing about all of this? As an established community leader, educator, and caretaker of Victoria's heritage, the National Trust has a responsibility to utilise its platform to champion the identification and contribution of meaningful solutions to ensure that our cultural heritage is secure into the future. We can communicate and share our knowledge, and we can lead by example. Sorry, jumped ahead there. So in June 2021, the National Trust in Victoria launched our inaugural Climate Action Plan. We had long been aware of the developing climate and biodiversity crisis and the unique role the heritage sector can play to contribute strategies to mitigate the impacts of climate change. For many years, we had already been making efforts to practice sustainable management in the custodianship of our sites and support sustainability through our advocacy work, such as our significant tree and landscape registers. Formalising our Climate Action Plan, or CAP, provided an opportunity for the National Trust to create consistency in our approach to sustainability when managing our properties and when communicating with our community. Some of the achievements that we have made under the 2021 to 2023 CAP included completion of a base year organisational emissions audit, joining the Climate Heritage Network, identifying processes and materials that can achieve emission and waste reduction, referencing heritage trades practices, and sharing these through public workshops and our annual Traditional Trades Expo. Two of our recommendations being included as additional objectives in the Victorian Built Environment Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan, which were regarding embodied energy and adaptive reuse of existing heritage buildings. We also completed an energy audit at one of our properties, Mooramong Homestead in Skipton, through a sustainability grant, through a Sustainability Victoria grant. And we consolidated our energy providers across all our sites to a single, more cost-effective and sustainable supplier. We are also currently preparing a submission to the Parliamentary Inquiry into Climate Resilience in Victoria. And in that submission in particular, we'd like to draw out the importance of heritage. For a more specific look as well at a property level, Ripponlea Estate is a great showcase of many of our sustainable projects. In 2013, we received a grant that enabled the replacement of the original 1960s terracotta roofing tiles. The project also involved the installation of solar panels to reduce the property's carbon footprint and allowed for more efficient harvesting of stormwater, to add to the water sustainability of the site and, most significantly, contribute to the upkeep of the gardens. Through a drainage grant in 2020, the site has been further improved with repairs and restoration to components of the unique sustainable water system that underpins the house, lake, waterfall, fernery, pond, and garden. And if you are interested in hearing more about that particular project, on our YouTube channel, there is a great presentation by Justin Buckley on the repair of that system. Ripponlea is also home to over 200 historic trees aged up to 150 years. Through the Trees for Life project, on-site interpretation and digital resources have been combined to promote public awareness about the historic trees and deliver key health and environmental messages. The See My Trees app is now available to use at Ripponlea and can track how much carbon is sequestered in each of the estate's mature trees. So, where to next? Well, the National Trust is now preparing our second climate action plan, which will have a greater focus on addressing the biodiversity crisis. New deliverables will be directly aimed at supporting and increasing the resilience of ecosystems within and beyond the National Trust's custodianship. We are also focusing on spreading the message that heritage is a climate action solution, not just a victim of climate change, like this very talk. Using our sites as case studies of good practice is key to this campaign, alongside raising awareness for the need to support the sustainable traditional trades industry, which Victoria needs to enact a reuse-first approach when it comes to our built environment. And if you're interested in learning more about traditional trades, there is going to be a fantastic panel discussion for Melbourne Design Week at Como House on the 27th of May, and I'd encourage you to look at attending that event. The link between sustainability and heritage is not obvious to everyone, but in just scratching the surface today, I hope you've gained a sense of the immense depth of innovative solutions heritage has to offer in combating climate change. So thank you so much for listening today. If you're interested in finding out more, you can visit some of these websites. And again, as I mentioned, if anybody has questions, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A. So here we've got a question. How can the everyday heritage owner contribute to climate action with their property? It's a fantastic question, and I think the best solution would be maintenance. Continued maintenance of a property, heritage or otherwise, is the best way to maintain upkeep and ensure that it doesn't need any crucial changes, replacement of fabric, or in the worst case scenario, demolition. As mentioned, the built environment is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and if we can try and sustain all of our built environment fabric, we'll have a better chance of mitigating the impacts of climate change into the future. And another question here, does the Trust have any strategies, policies, lobbying against the trend of developers knocking over housing? So the National Trust in general supports sustainable development. We would rather see a building that doesn't have any structural problems retrofitted and upgraded than have it demolished and a new form of housing built in its place. A good example is our response to the Victorian Government Housing Statement, and you can read our full response on our Trust Advocate blog. In that particular statement, we address the proposal to knock down the Housing Commission flats by the state government. And in that particular response, we implore the government to consider first whether there is a chance to upgrade those buildings and retrofit them, rather than looking at demolishing them, which is very much that reuse first mindset, rather than replacing it altogether, which is a very unsustainable practice. Great question, thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions for now. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you were able to learn something interesting, or you might like to share this presentation with people you know. The recording will be provided later. And if you do have questions or you do want to explore this issue further, you can always contact the National Trust's Conservation and Advocacy team. Our email address is conservation@nattrust.com.au. Otherwise, as I showed before in the final slide, there are plenty of websites, including the National Trusts, where you can learn more about this topic. So thank you all very much for attending, and have a lovely day.